Whether it's political ads on TV, yard signs, or chatter at school, kids are exposed to the election season and political opinions. And just like with everything else, they have questions. But do you have the right answers?
Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose when you're taking a vote and it's multiple people. And that creates what we like to refer to as experience near.
We talk about the best way to teach them about democracy, forming their own opinions, and setting them up to be future voters.
As soon as they go to school and somebody else says, well, this is what my parents think or whatever, then you are now not in control of what your child brings home.
And how a high school is encouraging and teaching kids how to register to vote. That's today on Mom Squad. Hi everyone, I'm Maureen Kyle. Thanks for tuning into Mom Squad. The election is almost here, and just like the past few elections, this one has our nation divided. Most likely, your child has seen political attack ads and has been exposed to some very adult issues and opinions. Maybe they've asked you questions based on those ads or what a friend tells them at school. It's hard enough to navigate as an adult, let alone as a child. We also want them to grow up informed in a healthy way about being part of a democracy. We want our kids to be knowledgeable future voters. In the last midterm election, the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement found that the national youth voter turnout was only 23%. That's lower than 2018, but still not the historic lowest in 2014, when only 13% of eligible new voters went to the polls. Michigan had the highest turnout of youth voters, followed by Maine, Minnesota, Oregon, and Colorado. The lowest youth voter turnout was in Oklahoma, Alabama, Indiana, West Virginia, and Tennessee. I don't know about you, but at some point, I've had one of my children turn to me and ask questions like, what's abortion? Or, do we hate this candidate? We want to say the right things to our kids. To help figure all of this out, I brought in one of my favorite child psychologists to talk to, Dr. Kim Bell. Kim, thanks for doing this. I know a lot of families have a lot of questions about how to talk to their kids, especially now that we are right at the end of the election. Kids are going to be hearing more. The ads are really ramping up. And I know in my household, kids are getting a little confused. So, I mean, just general. How much should we be involving our kids in the, not just election process, but sort of the political realm?
Right. Okay. So let's talk about what you can control and what you can't control. Let's kind of start with that. So in terms of the things that you can control, introducing children to the concept of an election can be done at a pretty young age. So in your household, you may explain it by taking a vote for what you have for dinner, or taking a vote for what movie you want to watch that night. And you give a couple of choices and everybody in the family gets a vote. And it teaches a couple of things that are actually really great, which is that sometimes you win and sometimes you lose when you're taking a vote and it's multiple people. And that creates what we like to refer to as experience near, right? That the experience becomes something that they can understand. At very young ages, the idea of an election is too abstract. It's too far removed from their experience for them to be able to fully comprehend and understand it. Maybe by the time they're 7, 8, 9, 10, they've had more conversations at school so that they understand who the president is. And, you know, they're still not going to really understand state Congress versus, federal and those nuances. And so you hand it to kids in bearable bits. And you can talk about the idea that people have different opinions and different values. Mm-hmm. And then you can talk about the things that are important to you in your home. Does all of that kind of make sense?
Yeah, completely. And I think that it's been interesting because you mentioned some of the age ranges that I have. And, some of the older kids, I remember being, I don't know, I'm trying to think. I mean, I think I was like in third grade or second or third grade when an election was happening, and the teacher said, okay, we're just going to vote for and she put the candidates in front of us. And I don't know, I just looked at the two guys on the, on the piece of paper, and I was like, well, I don't know, that guy looks like my grandpa. I don't know, so it's interesting that these kids are getting it in little tidbits. Mm-hmm. I think with more and more with, I don't know. I don't remember as many yard signs when I was a kid, and I don't remember the political attack ads, and maybe I just didn't notice them. But you talk about like little bits, and we get difficult questions sometimes, I guess is my next question, where I love, like, I don't know. I think in the midterm election, my daughter goes, "What's issue 1?" And I'm like, "Oh, you know what? Even being in the news, I should probably look up exactly what that means and explain it to you." But kids ask about certain issues too. What do? You can't turn the TV on right now without hearing like the word abortion. I got the question while the TV was on, "Mom, what's abortion?" And so these kids are being exposed to some very big concepts, even if we're trying to give it to them in little pieces. So how do we go around answering some of those hard questions when we do get it?
Okay, so that is sort of the part 2, which is the harder part, which is things you can't control.
Yeah.
Right. As much as you can protect your kids from what's happening in your own home, you can kind of monitor TV usage at times like this, et cetera, et cetera. As soon as they go to school and somebody else says, well, this is what my parents think or whatever, then you are now not in control of what your child brings home. Or you think that watching TV at a certain time is relatively safe, and then it's not. So in that case, the rule of thumb is kids can get through anything that can be talked about. And when it comes to issues, like, say, the issue 1 that you were talking about, it is perfectly okay as a parent to say, I'm not really sure either. When there are elections, they're very big and they're very complex and there's a lot going on. We can look it up together if you'd like, or I can look it up and let you know. Would you like that? Always end with that question, because kids might go, no, and walk away. Do you know what I'm saying? Like the question wasn't as important as maybe you thought it was to them.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, never feel pressured to give information that's not asked for.
Interesting.
So when it comes to something much more complex, much more emotional, much more grown up, like abortion, and they say, well, what is that? Then you can keep it very general and say it's a grown-up medical procedure that you don't really need to worry about at your age. Do you have any other questions about it? And then you might get the real story. Well, Susie said that her parents, and then you can address the specifics of what comes up.
Yeah.
Right. And you can also take that time, if there is this, well, Susie says, and her mom and her dad believe this, and they said that anybody who doesn't is wrong and bad and, whatever it might be, and those aren't your family values, then you can say, well, these are very difficult grown-up decisions, and a lot of people have different feelings about them. In our house, this is what we believe, very general, whatever that might be. And then you can say, but in our house, we also respect that people have different opinions. And this is a grown-up thing. So you and Susie should not have to worry about that in your friendship.
Yeah.
This is not something. So what they're really usually asking for is reassurance, not technical detail.
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah. I think parents, we get so put on the spot, and then we feel that pressure in the moment of, oh my gosh, how do I explain? I mean, even if it's not politics, there's other hard questions that they ask, and we get so wrapped up in how are we going to explain this? You brought up opinions, and I think that I don't know if we've ever talked about explaining opinions on Mom Squad, because, and I think that's a whole lesson that even adults need to understand, because I know couples that don't always share the same opinion, or, and we'll get into this later, but like there's friend circles and there's family members that don't share the same opinion, and kids catch on so fast. They overhear parents, they overhear family members, friends, whatever. This could be a big lesson in explaining opinions to kids. How would you go about, I mean, especially if they bring something up like, well, why don't you and dad agree on the, who you're voting for or something? Like, how do we sit them down and make this a lesson about valuing and respecting other people's opinions if they aren't ours?
So start with something that is much more experience near than politics. That is experience far.
Yeah.
You can start by, well, what's your favorite TV program? Is that your friend's favorite TV program? What if their favorite TV program was, something else? And how would you feel about being friends with them if they had a different favorite show than you? Oh, I don't know that I would care. Well, and that's what an opinion is. Or what kind of music do you like versus what kind of music do your friends like? Keep it experience near to the emotions that adults are feeling right now. And in the last several years of elections have grown emotionally so big, understandably, and that's fine. But these are adult opinions. And maybe you take your child to a rally because that's what you believe in, or a march or a walk or some kind of conversation like that. And you have to be ready in those situations to answer the questions that come up. And I mean, really, hopefully, what they learn is that you can very much disagree with somebody, but then once a decision's been made, you're still friends, you're still family, and you work together to resolve your disagreements and find a way to continue to be friends, or you love each other enough to understand that in families, sometimes you can have big arguments. And if you've gotten through the toddler years, your child knows what a big argument looks like. Mm-hmm. And when you and your kids are in a big argument and you all can still remember your loving feelings, that's really what we want for our kids, right? Mm-hmm. We don't want them to say, well, I can't be friends with them because of this or that or the other. We don't really want that for ourselves. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes in the last several years, we've found ourselves in that place. Mm-hmm. But those are grown-up concepts and those are grown-up arguments. For our kids, before they get to the point of understanding that complexity and making those decisions for themselves, the real goal is for them to be able to disagree with others, resolve conflict, and remain friends. And we want our kids in our household to disagree with us or not want to do what we tell them and get into big, huge fights with us where everybody has feelings. And then we resolve it and we remember that we love each other. And that those moments of disagreement do not ruin our good feelings for each other, that we can have two-way feelings and contain them and manage them. And that's just really hard for grownups right now to help kids with, because grownups are struggling with it themselves. Yeah. And so you have to take it out of the realm of trying to explain yourself and bring it down to an experience near metaphor that they can understand, so that they learn and develop those skills. And I mean, that's really the essence of emotional intelligence.
We are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, the biggest lesson even adults need to learn about the emotions that come with politics. Welcome back. We are talking to Dr. Kim Bell about how to talk to your kids about politics and this election season, and how to navigate those tricky conversations at gatherings and family parties. If you do have a child who, and this might be my child one day, if you do have a child who is attaching themselves to some of these strong opinions and finding an identity sort of in this political realm,
as a parent, like, do you have concern? Do you foster it? Do you guide it? What should a parent do if they're kind of fumbling with, what do I do with this child?
Yeah. So the first thing, you know me, I'm going to say this over and over and over again. The first thing is to be open to talking about it, because here's what's the adolescent is actually my favorite when it comes to things like this, because it's a time of such excitement. It's a time of beginning to understand the broader world to the extent that they can. Keeping in mind the frontal lobe, which controls our impulse control, is not fully developed until we're about 26. And so their behavior in response to that excitement can be impulsive. And that's where they need guidance. But they are exploring ways to disagree with you, because they're beginning to emotionally separate from you as they become older and older in their adolescence. And so sometimes they take opposite opinions than you might have, because they're trying on different identities that are not exactly in alignment. And so they can say things to you like, you just don't understand, or, you're old, or who knows, whatever it is that they say. You have to picture that as their way of trying to push away. And to be able to say to them, I want you to be able to explore all of these ideas that you have, but I want you to do it in a safe way. So no, you can't go alone with a bunch of 15-year-olds down to this rally or down to this march. But if there's a safe way for you to participate because it's what you want to explore, then yes. This is how I can support you in doing that. An adult has to go with you, or something along those lines has to happen. And for some kids, it's going with their parents to go door to door and knock on doors. And at teenage years, that's fine. We would never say during a time of emergency, and of course, based on my age, I hearken back to, say, like 9/11. One of the ways that teenagers felt less fear was by getting involved. And so they would bake cookies and bring it down to the fire stations and the police stations and help to feed the first responders. And that was their way of helping out. It's no different when the teenagers ask to do things like work in campaign offices, or knock on doors, or go to a rally. These are the same kinds of things that make them feel less fearful and less helpless in a situation that feels very big and very complex. And so it's always about keeping your mind open. I had a parent say to me when their child was developing a belief system that was not congruent with their own. And it was so beautiful. They said, either he's going to go out there and change the world, or he's going to go out there and the world will change him. And at some point in adolescence, we have to allow them that freedom of idea and to explore it. They also get incredibly passionate, because when they're just discovering all of these complex things for the first time, they have this unconscious feeling that nobody has thought of it before. And so there's this genuine belief, like, if people would just listen to me, me and my friends, we could fix poverty. We fixed it last Saturday night in our group chat, right? And you have to see that as a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I feel like that's also sometimes what adults do too. Oh, if they just listen to me, like, I know how to fix the economy. You brought up fear, and I do want to ask about that, because I think that, after the election, and I've seen it so much on social media, where everybody has this opinion of, if it's not their opponent or their candidate, if the opponent wins, that's it. The world is over. Let's move to a different country. There's that fear that, and I know that most of the time it might just be adults just kind of talking and not realizing it. But when kids overhear, like, okay, well, if that person gets elected into office, the world's over.
Yeah.
When they're hearing this at family parties, or, post-election, if they're hearing it at school or wherever they are, even in some of the attack ads, this person is such a bad person, if they're elected, you're putting somebody evil into this elected official spot. How do you talk to them about that sort of fear that gets dredged up during election time?
Yeah. So again, the first thing is to keep the adults in check. I've been working with adults over the last few months about their own anxiety, like this deep feeling of anxiety, in both directions, quite honestly. And this feeling, and so it's about, okay, let's really talk about that. What would you do? This is how I talk to adults. What will you do that next morning? Really, what will you do? And the vast majority of people will have a big feeling about it, and then they will get on with their day and they will go to work and they will take care of their family. And it's like, okay, let's start there. If that's what you're going to be doing, then that's what you have to communicate to your children. You know, people will say, well, I'll move out of the country. I mean, okay, that's not going to happen the very next day. What are you going to do the next day? And try to keep this huge feeling into a manageable experience. And maybe it is that you as a family, well, what are you going to do? Because teenagers in particular can be so devastated because they can be so excited. And so the devastation is exaggerated and everything feels like the end of the world to them. Do you know, like,
Yeah.
So something this big feels colossal. And so it's about managing it for yourself and having the conversation and saying, look, if this doesn't go our way, we will be fine. Will we have to do things to make sure that we're safe? Yes, but that's my job. My job is now and will always be to make sure that you're safe. And we can talk about it when you have these feelings. You know, it doesn't have to be this complete feeling of helplessness, which I think is where people go. That's where the anxiety comes from. I will be so disappointed that I will feel helpless in the situation. And that's not entirely true. You know, people can be motivated. Like maybe I want to study politics. Maybe I want to understand it better. And these things can catapult people into becoming leaders. So we don't want to completely shut it down, but we want to be brave enough to put our feelings into words and to understand that in every problem, there is a solution. And it may take time and it may be difficult, but we're here together as a family and we're going to keep each other safe and we're going to be active if that's what our family does. Or we're going to, maybe it's not us that are in danger, but our friends. And teenagers are not just worried about themselves. They're very much emotionally very attached to their friends. And so they worry for themselves, but they also take on the worry of their friends. And so then we talk about how to be a good friend to somebody else who's worried. And it doesn't mean you have to run out and fight everybody's battles, but you can be a good friend and you can understand what they might be going through. So these are all, I don't want to diminish the emotion of it, but these are all teachable moments. You know, these are all moments where you can have amazing transformative conversations with your kids at all ages about how we get along.
Yeah. I mean, I said perfectly. I mean, that's exactly what we all need to do. I know that, post-election is going to be divisive, but you're right. It's teachable moments. Yeah.
Yeah,
Kim,
it's all teachable moments.
Yeah, this has been so great. I thank you so much because I know a lot of families there, I can think about neighbors I have down the street that it's going to be, some strange conversations in the driveways or, at church or at school. So I think that these are all tangible things that we could take and then use in our living rooms and out there in our community.
And I think just as a last note for the grownups, that we sometimes can forget that if we are happy with the result, we don't always appreciate the sad of the other person that is not. And if our position does not win, if we lose, we feel entitled to our deep sadness. But when we win, we also have to know that as much as we disagree with our friend or our neighbor, or our family member, their sadness is just as deep as ours would have been in the reverse situation, and find some grace and compassion.
Yes, very well said. Very well said. I hope everybody can think that way next week.
A big thank you to Dr. Kim Bell. Coming up, we hear from high school teachers who put their students through mock voting and registered them to vote, how they're also teaching them to find good sources of information. As we mentioned at the start of the show, voter turnout is important, especially that young voter age range. To make sure that kids are prepared, a high school in Toledo is registering kids to vote and teaching them how to be informed. Ryan Lucien has the story.
The November general election is in less than 2 months, meaning it is almost time to hit the polls. And for first-time voters, especially 18-year-olds who are still in high school, it can be a scary experience. Perrysburg High School has a way to help.
We're coming down during the lunches and explaining just how easy it is to register to vote. It literally takes 2 minutes or less.
With the visit from the Board of Elections, students were able to experience voting using the machines with mock ballots. According to Ballotpedia, voter turnout rates during the last election in 2020 had 66% of ballots cast. Social studies teacher Ron DeGregorio says now is the perfect time to educate kids, believing it could close the gap.
If we can start people voting young and get that habit built up early, they'll be lifelong voters and understand the importance that that 18 to 24-year-old block has in voting.
Perrysburg High's teachers also educate their kids on topics relating to political issues, including finding reliable info on issues, identifying bias, and paying attention to polling and trends.
As an English teacher, right, I spend a lot of time helping kids find and identify quality sources, right? Sources of information that they can trust. We want kids to learn to reflect and to think about the issues that are most important to them.
And Perrysburg High wants their kids prepared not just for the election. English teacher Patrick Hall says they are getting them ready for the future because students are the future.
We obviously believe children are the future, right? And this is the step, this is getting them involved in their own future too, which is really important.
Thank you, Ryan, for that story. Get out and vote, make your voice heard, and most importantly, teach your child in a healthy way. We want to thank you for tuning into Mom Squad. If you missed any episodes, they're available streaming on your local news app, or you can find us on the Mom Squad YouTube page. I'm Maureen Kyle. We'll see you right back here next time.